So last week we talked about taking an image out of Lightroom and into Photoshop. And we did a really quick example where I took this image out, 3 of these, with cars in different areas, and I cleaned up the cars so that there were no cars left in the image. What I'm going to do this week is kind of show you the rest of my process in Photoshop. And so to get that into Photoshop, I'm going to hit Command E or Control E on a PC, and I'm going to edit the original. And it's going to open it up in Photoshop, and it's going to allow me to edit it exactly the way we left it from last week, which is 3 images layered with layer masks, as you can see. So now that I've sort of reopened this, like I said, last week we did this in a very sort of quick way. And I'm noticing this sort of hazy area in the middle there. So I'm going to turn off a layer and see. And much as my suspicion was, that's an artifact that's there. So I'm going to reselect my layer mask, and I'm going to switch my brush to black. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to paint over that. Yes, so you can see I can kind of clean that up. And this is the beauty of layer masking, is that I can come back and sort of touch these up. And if I go too far, you can see I start to bring that car back in. And then all I have to do is switch back to the white brush, and I can get that car right back out of there. So using the layer mask gives me this flexibility. I call it editability. I can come back and re-edit what I've worked on this image at any point because I have these layers with these layer masks. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to retouch on top of that. I'm going to go through and do what I call cleanup. So I'm going to come up here and I can say layer, new layer, and it's going to ask me the layer name, and I'm going to call it cleanup, and I'm going to put OK on there, and it's going to create an empty layer up here. Now, I could also click on this little icon down here and create a new layer, but I have this empty layer now, and I'm going to select my heel brush, and I'm going to make sure that Sample All Layers is checked up here, because my layer is empty, and if I try to retouch on an empty layer using the empty layer, it's going to just remain empty. But if I sample from all of my layers, the healing brush will look at all the pixels in the layers below, and it'll use them to do the retouching. So what I'm going to do for my cleanup is I'm going to zoom into 100%, which I can do by hitting the Command and plus buttons until I'm at 100%, and I can see down here in the lower corner. And then I'm going to use the space bar to create the move hand. And as long as I hold the space bar down, I have that little hand, and I can move my image around and I can look at it. And I'm going to start in the upper left corner, and I'm just going to scan across, and I'm looking for dust on my sensor and my camera. I'm looking for things in the image that I don't want to be there, like if there maybe was a blurred airplane or a bird in the sky, I might take that out. So I'm looking for the things that I think are distracting to my image. I thought at one point I might try to take out all these power lines, but I think that the power lines really are a part of what is going on in this image. Not to mention I would then have to take out all the power poles, and I don't think that's part of what I wanted to do on this image. So I'm going to leave all the power lines in, but I'm just looking for any little things or people in the shot that I want to remove. And so I'm just scanning the image left to right, right to left, top to bottom, just going over it bit by bit. There's a mop bucket down there, which I kind of like because it gives a little bit of that human element without the human. Let's see, there's all these little dots that are kind of in the street. And so I think I'm just going to take all those out, and all I have to do with my heel brush is just paint over them, and it'll automatically sample from around it and match the tonal values, which is kind of nice. I think those I want to get rid of, and I'm going to look and see what happens if I get rid of this larger bright area. And I think I kind of like that being gone. And so I'm just going to kind of hit it a few times with the heel brush just to smooth that out. I think that works. And there's a little bright spot on the curb there. We'll get rid of that. There's a little bright spot in here, which may be just some refraction of light, but I don't think I want to see it. And I'm just going to kind of clean up that edge there. Again, I'm just cleaning this up. I'm just taking out the things. If there were stains on the buildings, I might take them out. Stuff like that. I'm just sort of doing general cleanup. There's, stuff on the edge of the people or the escalator here. And so I'm just going to kind of clean that escalator edge up. I'm going to kind of come down a little more and see what else we got. You know, there's a lot of sort of schmutz on there that I just want to clean up. I'm just, you know, getting rid of some of the bits and pieces and just generally cleaning up my image. I'm just getting it to look the way that I want it to look. You know, kind of smoothing things out. Just sort of, again, clean up. There's something on the cement there. I'm just going to get rid of it. So now we've got our image all cleaned up. The next thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to hit Command 0, which is going to take me out to a full view. The next thing that I'm going to do is save this now as a work in progress number 1 is what I call it. So I'm going to come up to File and I'm going to say Save As. And it's going to bring up and make it a Photoshop document, and I'm going to change it and I'm going to eliminate Edit, and I'm going to call this WIP1. And what that means for me is Work in Progress 1. So what Work in Progress 1 means to me is I have done some retouching on the image and I've done my cleanup. And so I know that my image is clean and set up and ready to go. And at that point, what I want to do is I'm going to come up to my layer menu and I am going to say Flatten Image. And what Flatten Image does is it pulls all the layers together into a single layer on my image. And so I no longer have the ability to go back to my masking. What this is going to do for me is this is going to create a smaller file to continue working on. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to create what I call my dodge and burn layers. And so I'm going to bring up my levels or a levels adjustment layer. So I clicked on this little button down here, this black and white circle, and I created a levels adjustment layer. And I'm going to change it to a screen mode. And I'm going to change it to 38% opacity. And what I found is that screen mode at 38% opacity makes my image look about 1 stop brighter. So you can see that I get about a 1 stop brightness on that. So I'm going to click on the layer mask and I am going to come up here and say Edit, Fill, and I'm going to fill that layer mask with the background color, black, at 100%, which is going to make it disappear. And now I can mask that in. I'm going to click on where it says levels and I'm going to say dodge, because brightening is dodging. If you've taken a darkroom class, then you've learned that dodging in the darkroom is where you brighten areas of your print. I'm going to show you another way to do it. I'm going to go up and say New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to do another Levels Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to call this one Burn. You can see I did it before with the button down there. You can do it with the menu item up above. I'm going to say Burn. And on that one, I'm going to change it to Multiply, and I'm going to make it 38%. And so now you can see that that makes it about 1 stop darker. And I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to hit Command Delete, which will fill my layer mask with my background color, the keyboard shortcut for it. And so now I have a burn and a dodge layer. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a curves layer, and then I'm going to add a levels layer. And on this levels layer, I'm going to adjust sort of my overall brightness. And this is usually very minor adjustments, but it's just something I like to do after I do my retouching, just to make sure that all the tones kind of work together and that everything feels about right. And so I think that this image is maybe just a little bit light, and so I'm going to darken it down just a touch by using that center section. I can change the black point by using the left side, and if I hold down Option, I can see what is pure black. And there's a lot of pure black down there, which I'm okay with. And if I choose this side, I can see what's pure white. And there's a few things that are pure white, and I think I'm okay with that as well. And so that may be my only adjustment that I really do on that. And then I can come to my curves layer mask or adjustment layer, sorry, and I can adjust the curves on it. I'm going to make this color palette just a little smaller. So I can adjust my curves, which I use this to sort of fine tune the color on my image and kind of bring things into where I want them to be. So if I use my RGB curve, that's my overall brightness or darkness. And you can see that I can create as many points as I want, and I can really kind of get into fine detail on here. I'm going to reset this just so that we can get back. I can get into fine detail. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my shadows just a little bit, which I'm just going to grab down here in the darker area and bring it up. And I'm going to darken down my highlights just a little bit. I'm going to grab up here at the top and just sort of bring it down. Just kind of smooth the image out a little bit. And then I can go into my red, green, or blue layers, and I can adjust individual colors. So I'm going to go into the green, and I'm going to see what happens if I take a little green out, which adds magenta. I think maybe I just need a little touch of that. What I normally do is a little bit of magenta. So once I have a point on there, I can use my arrow keys and I can move my point around on the graph. And so I can go in 1 point increments and I can just sort of add a touch of magenta in there. And then to sort of offset that magenta a little, I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. And what I find is that that does a nice job of sort of warming my image up just a touch. You can see there's what it looks like with the adjustment, and there's what it looks like without it. The sidewalk or the everything has a little bit of a, maybe just a slightly cool tone to it. And then I can kind of warm it up a little bit. Now, I think that that's maybe a little much. And so I'm going to use my arrow keys and kind of take a little bit of the yellow out. And then I'm going to go back to my green layer and I'm going to take a little of that magenta out. I'm going to make it just a little more subtle of a move. So I think that I like that little move. Not huge moves. We did most of our adjustments in Lightroom. So this is really just fine tuning. Now the next thing I'm going to do is my dodge and burn. And to do that, I'm going to grab my brush, my paintbrush over here from my tools, and I'm going to use a white brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a brush that's fairly decent in size and has hardness of 0%, which is a nice soft edge. If I go to hardness of 100, it's a hard edge. It stops and starts really abruptly. But with a hardness of 0%, I get a nice big soft brush. So on a Mac, if I hold down Control Option and click and drag, I can adjust my brush to be bigger or smaller by moving side to side. And I can adjust the hardness by moving up and down. So you can see that hardness 100 is a very hard edge, and a hardness of 0 is a very soft edge. And so what I want is a decent sized brush with a soft edge. And I'm going to come up here and I'm going to change my opacity to about, I don't know, 10 to 15%, which is not very much. And I'm then going to come down to my burn layer, and I'm going to use that brush on the brighter areas of my image, and I'm just going to paint in there. And it's a very subtle little move, and you can see on my mask that it's just adding a little bit of white tone to the mask, and it's just ever so subtly burning in those areas, making them just slightly darker. So I'll turn it off and on, and you can see that it's just sort of darkening them down just a little bit. Now the reason that I keep my opacity so low is that I don't want to do this dodging and burning in one big hit, because then you'll see it. You'll really kind of see the effect. So if I take this up to 100% and I burn in the sky, you can really see where I've made that burn happen. I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to come back down to 10%. And if I do it a bunch of times and sort of subtly burn that sky in, now it makes it a little bit harder to kind of see where the edge of my brush is. It's a bit more of a amorphic shape that's up there. I'm going to undo all of those. I'm just using Command Z until I'm back to the parts that I'd done before, which is down here. So I think I'm going to actually increase it maybe to 20%, because 10% wasn't giving it a very big hit. I'm going to hit some of the street down here, just sort of darken some of these areas up. Maybe the horizon back there, kind of darken some of these buildings just a touch. So I'm just kind of going in and I'm just sort of touching little areas and just subtly darkening areas down. And then I can switch to my dodge, keeping the same brush, and I can hit areas to sort of lighten them up. And some of these areas are pretty dark, and so I'm going to come up to like 60% on my brush, which I did by hitting the 6 key on my keyboard, which will jump it right up to 60%. And you can see that with 60%, I'm starting to see the effects sort of a lot more. And I'm just kind of painting those in. That one was maybe too much right there. So I'm going to come back down to 30, and I'm going to hit the street sort of here in the foreground, just to brighten that up a little bit. Again, maybe around the lion. Oh yeah, that's kind of bringing the lion out just a little bit more. And the face of this building here kind of on that eastern side of the street. So I can make my brush a little smaller, and I can kind of get down in these areas underneath here. And maybe that street down into there. And so here's what my image looked like when it came in. And then here's my dodging and burning and my color correction. And now that I've done that and looked at it again, I think I'm still a little bit too magenta. And so I'm going to come into my green layer, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to soften that magenta out just a little bit more. This is why we work in layers. This is why I like Photoshop, because I can keep all these layers and I can come back to them and I can keep readjusting them. The next thing I'm going to do, sort of my big trick, is I'm going to come up here and select. Now it has select sky. I used to use color range to select the sky, but now I can just hit select sky. Photoshop is going to look at my image and it's going to pick out where the sky is. Perfect. And then the next thing that I do is that I modify that just a touch by feathering that sky. So right now it's individual pixels, and I feather it by 1 pixel. So it's just a soft edge. So there's just a slight transition. Then I'm going to come up here to my top layer, and I'm going to add a new adjustment layer with my selection still on of curves. And it'll take that selection and automatically make it a layer mask. So it took my selection of the sky and it made a layer mask, which means I'm now only adjusting the sky. And what I do on this one is I usually make my skies a little bit darker. I add a bit of blue to them. And just to make that blue kind of pop a little bit more, I add just a touch of magenta to it. And I know you're saying it looks kind of totally fake right now. That's my objective with this right now, is to make it look just a little bit fake. And then I come down here to my layer opacity, and I can adjust that opacity back. I can go to 0, and I'm back to my original sky. And I can take that, and as I slowly increase it, I can add some of that color in until I get sort of an effect that I want. I get the look that I want. And so you can see that what I've done is I've just blued the sky up a little bit. So I kind of go overboard so that I can come back in the opacity and some of the original color can kind of come through. And I feel that I get a much more organic feeling to my image when I do that. So that would be my next set of retouching that I would do, where I would have these layers. My flattened work in progress 1, a dodge layer, a burn layer, a curves layer for color, a levels layer for overall tone, and maybe a curves layer for my sky. And then, just for fun, I'm going to do another one where I'm going to select color range. And I'm going to just click on this palm tree here, and I'm going to select the greens. So with select color range, I get this little eyedropper, and I can just select the greens. Like if I click on this tree, it'll select just the green areas. And I'm going to put sort of a quick mask preview over it so you can see kind of what it's showing. If I want to add to that, I can click on this eyedropper with the plus, and I can add more tones to that, right? I can just sort of continue to get some of those green tones that are in the trees. And then the other thing that I can do is I can use what's called my fuzziness, which sort of takes it from being the exact colors that I chose and makes it a little bit of the colors around the colors that I chose. And so the more fuzzy that I make it, the more colors it wants to pick. And the less fuzzy I make it, the more narrow those bands of colors are. And so I'm going to go sort of in here. You can see that I got a little sidewalk. So I'm going to select the eyedropper with the negative, and I'm going to click it on the sidewalk to sort of get rid of those tones. It's a balancing act, right? So those tones really equate to the highlights on the trees. So I'm just going to kind of keep plussing and minusing until I get a selection that has sort of a fair amount of the greens. It's not getting these down here because they're in deep shadow. So I don't expect those to come up because they're almost pure black. So once I get something that I think will give me the selection that I want, I'm just sort of checking my fuzziness here and seeing how much I can really kind of play with that. And I think that that may be about it, somewhere in there. And I'm going to hit OK, and it's going to create that selection. And again, just so that I don't see any pixely edges, I always feather by 1. I'm going to select up at the top, and I'm going to create a new curves adjustment layer. And you can see it's created my mask. If I hit the / key, it'll show me my mask. And now when I adjust this layer, it's only adjusting the trees or the greens in the plants. And so I may want to just brighten those just a touch. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to add some green into those. And then I'm going to come down and play with my opacity, right? So all the plants, or these trees especially, and the palm trees as well, look a little bit yellowy orange to me. And so I'm going to bring that opacity up until I get a little more of that kind of green tone that's in there. And I think I may actually come up and add a touch of blue as well, which I know sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but that blue is going to counteract some of the yellows that are in the trees. And so now I'm going to play with my opacity again and see. So you can see that it's actually giving me kind of a nice effect on the greens in the image. It's just subtly adding some greens in there. So there's what it looked like before. They were kind of, I'm looking at these trees right in here. They're kind of brown and look a little less than optimal. And then when I pop that in, they just sort of pop out just a little bit green. And it's added a little green to all the plants down here and to the palm trees. And so I think that that's good. I think that that will work. I can look at my mask and see I've really narrowed it down. I'm not getting any of the greens on any of the buildings anywhere else. It's really just narrowed down to the plants, which is really, really nice. And so at this point, what I would do is I would do a save as, and I would change the 1 to a 2. This is my work in progress 2. And my work in progress 2 has any selective color moves, my overall tone move, my overall color move, my dodging, and my burning. And then I'm going to use my submenu here, and I'm going to flatten my image again. And then because I brought this in, my Lightroom may have been set up as 16-bit colors, which it is. I'm going to now change this to 8-bit colors, which again, this is all about making file size a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to duplicate this layer, this background layer. So I can drag it down to this and duplicate it that way, or I can hit Command J and it'll duplicate my layer. And then I'm going to come up and I'm going to filter, and I'm going to do a Smart Sharpen filter. So I'm going to now sharpen my image. So I'm going to select an area of my image that I want to see, and I can change. I'm going to just do what's called Gaussian blur, which is just sort of a general blur. And I can change my amount. You can see as I crank that up, I get more effect of what was going on in there. I can change the radius, which is how far around. What the sharpening is doing is looking for areas of contrast. And as I change that radius, it looks for more areas of contrast. So you can see it's starting to kind of glow around everything. And so I want to kind of keep my radius down fairly low. I can use this to reduce noise because when it does its sharpening, sometimes it adds a little bit of noise to it. And I'm going to bring my amount up until it's over sharpened, right? I want to just start to see a little bit of that haloing happening around there. So I think that that's going to be good for me. And I'm going to hit OK. And again, you might be thinking, wow, you just over sharpened this image and it's going to look like it's been sharpened. Well, now I'm going to zoom into 100% because I always want to gauge my sharpening at 100%. And the way I would describe this image now would be crunchy, right? Everything, all the edges have like a crunch to them. And so I'm going to change my blending mode, which is how the layers interact with each other. I'm going to go all the way bottom to luminosity. And this will eliminate any color noise that shows up from the sharpening. And then I'm going to move my opacity back to 0. And now you can see that the image is just a touch mushy in the middle here. Like all the tones are just sort of blending together. And so I'm going to just slide that opacity up until things start to sort of clear up a little bit in there. So again, I'm kind of using the opacity on my image to get rid of that over sharpened look and kind of end up back with an image that just looks sharp. It doesn't look mushy at all. And at that point, I'm going to do a save as, which I did Command-Shift-S for my save as. And I'm going to change the 2 to a 3, and this is my work in progress 3. And at that point, I'm done with how I process my images out. And when we come back into Lightroom, you can see that Lightroom did not bring all of my images automatically back in. Every once in a while this happens. Somehow the connection gets lost between the two things. Maybe because I'm looking at my previous imports. So let's go back down and look at the layers demo, and it still didn't bring them back in. So I'm going to show you how to update this folder so that you can see all your images. Now what I'm going to do is right click on that folder, and there is a menu item that says Synchronize Folder. And when I click on that, it's going to look at the folder and compare it to what Lightroom sees. And it's showing me that it needs to import 3 new photos. And so I'm going to say Synchronize, and it's going to bring in those 3 new photos into my Layers menu. And you can see that those 3 photos are my Work in Progress 1. It's loading the preview. My Work in Progress 2 with the color moves, right? So there's the cleanup. You can see that I've cleaned up that spot in the middle there and that haze that was there. This is the cleaned up image. This is the color corrected, dodged, and burned. And now you can really kind of see the difference between them. And then this is the sharpened. And so there's all 3 of my images. And so this sharpened one would be my final. And then if I wanted to send it out to somebody, I would click on my export button and I would export it. So that's kind of my workflow through Photoshop.